Correct. It is not valid to use bones for istinja. Why not? I was just waiting to see if somebody's going to ask why. That's correct. Yeah, but there's a detail here. We'll say it this way. It's not valid to uh, make istinja with bones because the bone comes either from an edible animal or not. Yani, or I can say it this way. The bone is either najasa or not. So if it's najasa, then that rules it out right there for being najasa. And if it's not najasa because it came from a slaughtered animal, for example, then Allah puts meat on those bones for the Muslim jinn. So it's not permissible to use bones for istinja at all. So now we're on the chapter for ghusl. Ghusl is washing the entire body with an intention. The entire outer body. You have to wash the outside of your body with an intention. And it's that simple. Those are the two integrals of ghusl. The intention and washing the entire outer body. So whatever's considered the outside of the body is obligatory to wash. What's counted as the outside of the body, included in that is the inner plates of the buttocks, cheeks. Those are counted as the outside of the body because if one were to squat, then they would appear. If one were to squat, they would appear. So he must get that area in the ghusl. And similar to that is the case of the deflowered woman. That means not virgin. The deflowered woman in her ghusl must wash whatever would appear if she were to squat. As opposed to the virgin woman, she just has to wash what appears without considering the case of squatting. Why would a person need to perform a ghusl? It's going to be so that he gets out of the major religious impurity. Because there's a big religious impurity and a small religious impurity. Big religious impurity is lifted by ghusl. Small religious impurity is lifted by wudu or ghusl. Wudu or ghusl. Big religious impurity is lifted by ghusl. Small religious impurity is lifted by wudu or ghusl. Meaning, if you had small religious impurity and then you made wudu, this will lift your small religious impurity. If you had big religious impurity and then if you had a small religious impurity and a big religious impurity, both of them, and then you performed obligatory ghusl without an intention to make wudu, obligatory ghusl without an intention to make wudu, then you will lift your small impurity. Just by doing an obligatory ghusl without doing anything that would break a wudu, that's enough to enable you to pray, even without making wudu. So small religious impurity is lifted by wudu or ghusl. Big religious impurity is lifted only by ghusl. And tayammum does not lift any religious impurity. Tayammum does not lift any religious impurity. Tayammum only makes it permissible to pray. So inshallah, when we get to the tayammum chapter and I ask you, what does tayammum do? Then you should tell me the correct answer. Tayammum merely makes it permissible to pray. And if you want to add for more clarity, you'd say, and it does not lift any religious impurity. So you would perform a ghusl to get out of the greater religious or ritual impurity. This ghusl, you might call it a shower, or you might call it a bath. Yeah, it could be either one of those. If you stood under flowing water with an intention and washed all of the outside of your body, that's a valid ghusl. And if you submerged your entire body into a tub, that's a bath, and made an intention, then this is a valid ghusl. Even if it were a small amount of water. It doesn't even have to be a large amount of water. If you could manage to submerge your whole body under a small amount of water, I mean. Yes. So it is valid to be a bath, and it's valid to be a shower, and you could call a shower a bath anyway. But just to draw attention to the difference between standing underwater and submerging yourself in a tub. Ghusl basically means a washing. Ghusl is the name of this thing we're talking about. It's like the Arabic word ghusl with a fatah. With a fatha, ghusl. Ghusl definitely means washing. And ghusl is the name of this procedure we're talking about. And you can even call it irtisal. Irtisal. That means washing. So whether you poured the water, you sat under, whether you were under running water, or whether you submerged yourself in water. If you can't find water or use water, then you're going to make tayammum, and that has its own chapter. So, what makes one required to perform this ghusl? There are five things that make a person obligated to do it for himself. Six things if you want to count the dead person, but the dead person doesn't have to make the ghusl for himself. The Muslims are going to give a ghusl to the dead Muslim, not that he does it for himself. So if we don't want to count that here, then we're going to say five things make ghusl obligatory. Two of them are common between men and women. Those are sexual intercourse and ejaculation. And three of them are special to women: menses, postpartum bleeding, and childbirth. That means then the woman has a total of five. The man has a total of two. And when do you have to do this ghusl also? Immediately, as soon as you became junub, sexually impure? No. Rather, before you pray, like wudu. If you broke your wudu, you need to make wudu before you pray. If something happened to you that makes you have to perform a ghusl, then you have to do it before you pray. But if you are junub and you're not going to perform a ghusl yet for some time, then it is sunnah for you to at least make wudu. Yes, you can't pray like that still because you need to make a ghusl. But if you make wudu while you still need to make a ghusl, at least you will lighten the impurity, the religious impurity. And it's good for you not to sleep junub. And the devil, the devil who likes to bother you when you try to fall asleep, he will have easier time bothering you when you are junub also. So the first thing that makes a ghusl obligatory is ejaculation of one's own sperm. And I'm going to dare in this lesson to call what comes out of women sperm. I'm going to use the word sperm for what comes out of women too. So I'm going to say here the men have sperm and the women have sperm. This ejaculation of men or women makes ghusl obligatory. But what makes one obligated is for one's own sperm to come out, not for someone else's sperm. I think we mentioned the case of a woman who had sexual intercourse with her husband, and he ejaculated, and she did not have her own climax. And then she took a ghusl, but then her husband's fluid came out of her after that. So, what's the judgment here? Does she need to do a ghusl? No, this does not make her have to take a ghusl because it's not her own fluid. But it does break her wudu because it is something that comes out of the private part other than her own ejaculated fluid. And this ghusl is not going to be obligatory until the fluid appears, except in the case of the deflowered woman. Deflowered woman could have uh, ejaculation without it appearing. There would be something that came out though. So when we say that it has to appear for the ghusl to be obligatory, this means if a man felt the onset of an ejaculation and he took hold of his penis until that went back down and it never came out, then he doesn't have to perform a ghusl because it never appeared. Yes. And if a person ejaculated and therefore he has to perform ghusl, let's say, and he did perform ghusl, and then after he performed the ghusl, more, sorry, wait, yeah, more came out. Then after he performed the ghusl, more came out. Then yes, he has to do another ghusl. And even if he urinated before more came back out, even if one urinated before more sperm came back out, when that fluid comes back out the second time, he needs to take another ghusl. And this ejaculation of which we speak is confirmed by three signs. One, it exits in spurts. That means it gushes. Uh, or you might say, one convulses when it exits. Two, it exits with pleasure, after which one's desire dissipates. Eh, Yeah, the desire goes away, and even weakness sets in afterwards. And three, it has a particular smell. That depends on if it's wet or dry. If it's wet, it smells like dough or pollen. And if it's dry, it smells like egg white. These are common between men and women. But the man's mani is whiter and thicker than a woman's mani. The woman's mani is yellower and thinner. It's not a condition that all these three signs exist together. And if any of these three signs are confirmed, then one has to perform ghusl even if he didn't see the sperm. Meaning a person is certain that he had the convulsions, but he didn't see any fluid. He has to perform a ghusl. Or he's certain that he felt the feeling, but he didn't see any. He has to perform a ghusl. So we're saying, if one is absolutely certain of any of those signs, then he has to perform a ghusl. So this means then a person has to perform a ghusl for even a single drop of mani that came out, and even if it had the color of blood. And whether the way it came out was halal or haram, and whether a person was conscious or unconscious. And even if that fluid came out from an unusual exit, like if a man had a hole in his testicles or he had a hole in his back, and then the fluid came out of there, below his navel, from below his navel. That hole in his back is below his navel. Any question? The second thing that makes ghusl obligatory out of five things is the sexual intercourse, with or without a barrier. So it means then, for example, condom doesn't stop the ghusl from being obligatory. The minimum thing, uh, or the ghusl is going to be obligatory on the penetrator and the penetrated. And the minimum penetration that makes the ghusl obligatory is for the glans penis to disappear into the vagina, into a private part, more broadly, into a private part, front or back private part. for the entire glans penis to disappear into a private part. Then the penetrator and the penetrated both require ghusl. Of course, we talk about a human here when it comes to the penetrate. Yeah, we talk about the human here when it comes to the obligation of ghusl. But if you understand how things go, if you understand the abstractness of the fiqh, then you should understand. Yani, like we're saying, the penetrator and the penetrated both will be obligated to do a ghusl because of the glans penis disappearing completely into the private part. Uh, and this is whether that's human or animal, whether human or animal. So if it were an animal involved, there's no ghusl on the animal. So what I'm getting at is to say, if the penetrator were an animal, the human's gonna have to take a ghusl. The penetrated human is gonna have to take a ghusl. And if the penetrator were human, if the penetrated were an animal, if the penetrated were an animal, the human's gonna have to do a ghusl. So I think I said that right. If the penetrator were an animal, the human's gonna have to take a ghusl. If the penetrated were an animal, the human's gonna have to take a ghusl. And when we say the disappearance of the entire glans penis, and it means if the entire thing does not disappear into the private part, then there's no ghusl for either party. And when we say that the penetrated one has to do a ghusl, also that's not including a dead Muslim. When you give wudu or ghusl to a dead Muslim, that's because of death, not because of something else. Not because of something else. So it means, if you were taking care of a dead Muslim and you gave him wudu, and that's a male, and then a marriageable woman touched his skin, you don't have to give him a new wudu. Although that marriageable woman, she lost her wudu, her own wudu. So the wudu and the ghusl for the dead is because of death, not because of something else. And therefore, you're not going to have to repeat the wudu of the dead Muslim after you gave it to him for any reason. And you're not going to have to repeat the ghusl of the dead Muslim after you gave it to him for any reason. The third thing that makes the ghusl obligatory is the end of the menses. The end of the menses. Termination of menses. Yani, that's the blood that comes from the woman's vagina in a healthy manner without being due to pregnancy. Or without being due to childbirth, rather. That's the blood that exits the vagina in a healthy manner without being due to childbirth. Whether that's blackish blood or red or pink or yellow or it's murky like the color of soil, or whether that's thick or it's thin, or whether it has strong smell or does not. When the menses terminates, she has to do a ghusl. The way for her to know that the menses stopped is by putting something like a cotton and withdrawing it without any sign of blood. Then she confirms that it stopped. And there's no special time when she's obligated to see if it stopped. Whenever she sees that it stopped, then that's when she says that it stopped. And whenever she sees that it started, that's when she says that it started. That's the rule. If the woman has less than 24 hours of bleeding and it never came back, then there's no ghusl for her. Because the minimum of menses is 24 hours. The maximum of menses is 15 days. If a woman had more than 24 hours of bleeding, but she didn't reach 15 days yet, and the bleeding stopped, then she needs to do a ghusl. But the rule is she doesn't have to do the ghusl immediately. She needs to do it, she needs to pray before the prayer time goes out. So if she wants to wait just to see if the blood's going to come back, she can wait until The time gets too tight, yani before the time gets too tight, and then do a ghusl and pray. It's not going to let the prayer time go out, saying, I just wanted to make sure the bleeding didn't come back. Then if it did come back, she's going to know she's still menstruating, actually. And the fourth thing is the termination of the postpartum bleeding. That's the bleeding after emptying the womb. The bleeding after the womb is emptied. So if you want to say it just in easy words, you could say it's the bleeding after delivering a baby. If you want to say it with more broad words, which is that's what the person who studies fiqh really wants. If he wants to be good in fiqh, if he wants to be good in just obligatory knowledge and understand like a commoner, then you say it's the bleeding after delivering a baby. If you want to understand fiqh well and the abstractness of its rules, you want to find the broadest way to say it, which is to say after the womb is emptied. Because then if you say it that way, it means even if it were a miscarriage, even if it were a cesarean section, I think that's how you say it. They cut the baby from her belly. If they cut the baby from her belly and then she bled from her vagina, that's postpartum bleeding. When this postpartum bleeding terminates, then she has to do a ghusl before she prays. And the fifth thing that makes the ghusl obligatory is childbirth itself. Even stillborn. And this is because, why does childbirth make a ghusl obligatory? Because the origin of the baby is the seminal fluid. So the fluid that, if this fluid comes out, you have to do a ghusl. Well, what happened here is that the fluid transformed into something and then came out. So you still have to take a ghusl. And even if what was delivered was just a blood clot or a flesh clump, the ghusl is still obligatory. And so, like we said, and here's a benefit, yani, a digression. What's confirmed from the book and the sunnah is that a woman has an ejaculated fluid. So, a sperm, a kind of sperm. And we don't say she has eggs. We don't say the human is created from a sperm and an egg. We say the human is created from two sperms, the male and the female sperms. They meet and then they fuse and they stick to the womb. It's basically the wall of her womb. They stick to it as a fused thing. They become one. And then they stick to the wall of her womb and they start developing by the power of Allah. It starts to turn into some blood, then it starts to turn into some flesh, and then it will from there grow. So that's the right belief that complies with what came in the Quran and the Sunnah. Some people, they say they are Muslims, but they don't want to believe some things that are not the position of modern science. So they would be Muslims. As Muslims, let's say they don't know. They're going to say something that they didn't learn in their religion. They're going to say, yeah, so there's the sperm and there's the eggs. So we're going to say to them, no, that's not like that. We don't say it like that. So then there's a type of person who, if you show him what's in Quran and Sunnah, is fine for him. He will adjust himself. And then there's type of person who will resist you as much as he can, even to the extent of being completely silent about what's in the Quran and the Sunnah. It's like, okay, he's been a Muslim, he doesn't want to say, no, I don't believe in the Quran. But it's like he's saying, well, that's your explanation for what's there. But he doesn't want to look for what the real explanation is. Because he wants to believe in his scientific theories. So that's a person who's not afraid to take a conviction that's not the conviction of the Messenger of Allah. This person has khalal. He has a gap in his religion. He has a hole. So, like we said, the ghusl just requires two things, meaning its integrals are two things: the intention and washing the entire outer body. So, the time of the intention is when the water touches your body, and you're going to make an intention like in your heart, you're going to say obligatory ghusl, or now I lift the big impurity, or anything that's equivalent to that. But if it is an obligatory ghusl, you have to have an intention of the obligation or an intention of lifting the impurity. Because ghusl, the form of a ghusl, the procedure of doing a ghusl is identical to taking a regular shower or regular bath. Ghusl is different from wudu in this way. The form of wudu is so particular that you wouldn't do it without it being a worship. So whenever you make wudu, it's enough for your intention to be wudu. And you don't have to have the intention to do obligatory wudu, even without intending the obligation of wudu and just intending only wudu. That's going to be valid even for an obligatory wudu. Because wudu won't be but a worship because of having such a particular format. But ghusl, what you do to achieve a ghusl is not unique. Because if you wanted to merely bathe or shower, then it looks just like a ghusl too. So since the procedure of a ghusl is not unique to a worship, uh, then you must make the intention for an obligatory ghusl, or the intention to lift the religious impurity, or something like that. Like a woman said, I now intend to lift the impurity of menses. So that's sufficient, if that's really what her impurity was. Not like her impurity was because of sexual intercourse. So she doesn't say in her heart, now I lift the impurity of menses. If her impurity was due to sexual intercourse, that wouldn't be valid. It's sunnah, though, to start with the top of your body, even though you can make the intention when the water touches any part of your body. And the second integral of the ghusl is to wash the entire outer body. What's not outer body? Inside your mouth, inside your nose, inside your ears, under your eyelids. Those are not the outer body. And ghusl doesn't require stripping. It just requires that the water gets to your skin and your hair. So that means a person can do a ghusl with his clothes on, as long as the water gets through. And that, by the way, is something you want to do for a dead Muslim. You might find some Muslims, they put over the dead Muslim a plastic bag to cover his awrah. And then they keep it there while they do the ghusl. So they made their job so much more difficult like that. Replace that plastic with a towel. That's going to make your job much easier, because it's going to be valid to pour the water through, yani, over the towel, because it's still going to flow to his skin. Then you can wash him without exposing his aura. And it's sunnah not to bathe nude. So one could still wear some trunks or izar to the ghusl. That's a good practice. A woman can wear an izar, if you didn't know. It's not special to men. Maybe a woman would need to take a ghusl at work. If she fears Allah, she will. Like, she has a job. She works from 9 to 5. Dhuhr goes out at 3:30, and her period went off. So what's she gonna do? Be sinful and skip the prayer and then say, I'll make it up when I get home. Not if she's a God fearing woman. If she's a God fearing woman, she's gonna make it work somehow. She might what? She might make a ghusl in the toilet with a cup. In the toilet, I mean where the toilet is, she closed the door and she just has a cup and she refills the cup and pours water. Maybe she has a water bottle that she can squeeze on herself. And she squeezed it little by little, washing all her body. Squeeze on her arms, wipe it. Squeeze on her arms, wipe like this. And managed to get all her body, perform ghusl, pray, and then get back to work. Nobody even knew what happened. But the stall's all wet. Hey, who wet the stall up like that? And she's not going to say anything. If a man were uncircumcised, it's obligatory on him to pull back that foreskin so the water will get there. All the hair needs to be penetrated by the water. Matted hair like dreads and braids do not stop the water from getting through, but if they did, it would be obligatory to unmat them, yani to pull that hair apart. But as long as they don't stop the water from getting through, then it's not a condition to pull the braids, to unbraid the hair, yani, or to undo one's dreads. And of course, the person is going to wash any scabs, any extra organs, extra toes, extra fingers. Also, any cracks, like cracks in his elbows and knees and heels. And Allah knows best.